That one thing, the 18-year-old telling family court that his mom and his mom's husband, Chris, put him in a chokehold in the back of the family vehicle, to me, it's not going to bode well if this other child ends up in trial.
But you know who else is going to be paying close attention to that is the FBI. And when they're putting this case together, they're going to be looking at details like that and constructing a case. It may well be that these kind of instances come up in what the prosecutors are building, presenting to a jury if it gets there, if, in fact, a member of the family is charged and we do get a murder trial here.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
A young girl was murdered more than a month ago. There is one suspect and everyone knows who he is, although we don't know his name and can't see his face.
What is happening?
I don't mean that as a joke. I mean it as a serious question. What is happening? But before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Thank you very much to JJLMNOP5226. Thanks very much for your contribution. By the way, if you don't know how to contribute a super thanks on your mobile, you can have a look at how it's done. Scroll to the right, there it goes. Please do hit the thanks button if you haven't already. For those following the Ramsey case, we'll be dealing with part 2 of the housekeeper who saw too much quite soon. So look out for that. If you're finding this analysis worthwhile and you haven't subscribed, please do subscribe. And now let's get back to the unusual family dynamic being the reason for the unusual secrecy in this case.
It sounds like we're getting close to the point of charges. It's just a discussion of whether it's going to be federal charges or state. And there is a law where the federal law enforcement can pass a case like this over to the state law enforcement bodies to prosecute. It is a difficult thing and a not standard thing to prosecute a juvenile in federal court.
What is happening? Well, it is a minor that is being charged here, and that is causing all sorts of difficulties, all sorts of complications. Why? Because minors have certain rights in a criminal scenario that adults don't. What else is happening? Well, here it is in a nutshell via Fox News. When you're dealing with essentially one family, authorities have to be careful about what they put out there. You don't want to tip off what's going on when your victim's family and your perpetrator's family are in the same house. Now, where have we dealt with that before? When the victim's family and the perpetrator's family are in the same house, look at those words. Well, in this case, not only are they in the same house, they were in the same boat, on the same boat. And the boat is a floating crime scene. Nancy Grace recently pointed out that as soon as they discovered the crime, you didn't have proper investigators at the scene, on the scene, for several hours. You didn't have the proper personnel photographing the scene, gathering evidence such as the clothing worn by the stepson. Meanwhile, the stepmom, the mother of the murder suspect, and the murdered girl's father, we saw them a couple of days ago arrive at court holding hands.
What is happening?
Again, I don't mean that as a joke. I mean it as a serious question. What is happening? Now, the reason the feds are taking so much time with this case is partially due to toxicology. Those results can take up to 6 weeks, which means there is at least a week or two to go before that puzzle piece has been dealt with. Look at this from Fox News. Autopsy and toxicology reports have yet to be released, but preliminary information found no signs of SA or any drugs or alcohol in Kepner's system. But there's more. Rotano said that the dynamic in terms of this family is highly unusual and may be driving the tight-lipped posture of federal authorities. She added that the investigators may also be grappling with the specifics of the cause of death, ruled, and this is quite unusual, as mechanical asphyxia, not just asphyxia, not even ligature asphyxia, but mechanical. They may not know if they can prove what happened. Mechanical asphyxia could be argued as accidental or something that went too far. Investigators may still be sorting out what the evidence supports. And that's another area where, when you're dealing with a minor, the minor may have killed his victim by accident. He may not have intended to do what he did. He may have underestimated his own strength. Mechanical asphyxiation may present a problem. How do you prove that the murderer committed murder and that Anna didn't die by accident or even on her own? I do think the bruises around her neck, motive, behavior patterns, CCTV, the post-meditation aspect, but perhaps most crucial of all, the hiding of the body, all of that play into culpability, inculpatory evidence potentially. Thomas Hudson, that is the stepson's father, alleges that his ex-wife's choices, that's Chantal's choices, have put the 16-year-old's future in jeopardy. And by extension, didn't her choices put the 18-year-old's future permanently in jeopardy? Is the stepmom the only one who put Anna in jeopardy, though? Because her father was also there, right across the hall. So I think there is a possibility here that at least one parent in this case, possibly even both, yes, possibly Anna's biological father as well, could face charges of his own. What could also happen is that one parent testifies against the other parent. There could be some kind of plea deal situation going on. And there does seem to be some drama going on behind the scenes. Have a look at this, also from Fox News. Anna's father, Christopher, was subpoenaed ahead of Friday's hearing. However, according to a process server sworn statement filed ahead of the hearing scheduled for Friday, Christopher was unreachable after he was ordered to testify. Process server Leslie V. Kinsey wrote that Kepner's SUV sat running in the driveway and the lights inside the Titusville home were on, but no one responded to repeated knocks or the doorbell. And so, did Christopher ultimately testify? I don't believe he did. Now I want to deal with some comments Nancy Grace recently made about the crime scene in the Daily Mail. The ship returned to Port Miami on November 8th, and because the death happened in international waters, the FBI took control of the case. By this time, more than 24 hours had passed since Kepner was last seen alive, a crucial window for any homicide investigation. The so-called investigators on the cruise ships are also not crime scene investigators trained in very delicate DNA analysis, according to Nancy Grace. And then this is the pertinent part. She said, I doubt any type of expert analysis of the scene was done. So has evidence been lost? What happened to the clothing the stepbrother was wearing that night, which could have contained vital DNA evidence, including of Anna? Did anyone take pictures of his body? Were there scratches or bruises on his body? I don't know, and we may never know. And of course, all of this plays into the defense case. In a case like this, Grace said that she hopes that a kit was conducted before the victim's body was cremated. Another case where there were subtleties in terms of evidence gathered post-mortem by the medical examiner was, of course, JonBenet Ramsey. In JonBenet's case, her body was released only for allegations to be raised after she was buried that a stun gun might have been used. By then, it was too late to verify these claims, to check these claims, to test these claims, since permission was refused to exhume the body. In the Ramsey case, the sexual aspect was also somewhat unclear and open to interpretation, and almost 30 years later, it still is. That is a big unknown in the Anna Kepner case as well. If sex was the motive, is there any evidence of it, besides that she was found naked? Then there's also this. Any and all evidence is gone unless it was kept by the medical examiner, Nancy Grace said. The death certificate obtained by ABC News ruled Kepner's death a homicide caused by her being mechanically asphyxiated by other person or persons. That addition there is also quite interesting. There were also 2 bruises on the side of her neck. Now, I wonder whether they'll find DNA, blood, even seminal fluid on the blanket that she was wrapped in. If you think about it, a blanket is like a sponge that can store that sort of evidence. We know in the Amanda Knox case, Meredith Kirch's bra clasp was found under the blanket and had Knox's boyfriend's DNA on it. That ought to have been very strong evidence in that case, but the defense in that case, successfully argued a contaminated crime scene, and the same thing could happen here. Regardless of charges against the minor, if it turns out the minor was under the influence, and this will come out in the toxicology as well. I mean, pray they took a blood sample from him early on. But let's say, for the sake of argument, toxicology does prove that the minor was drunk at the time. Well, then you could have a situation where his stepmother could well be liable, in addition to her allowing her stepson to share a room with the young victim. That liability could even extend to others. It could extend to the cruise ship, unless the crew were fooled into supplying alcohol to the parent, who then passed it on. That's if that happened at all, to the minor. I would imagine in that case her culpability rises in comparison to Anna's father, because technically he's not even the minor's stepfather, because I don't think they were even married at the time. Meanwhile, some new footage of Anna has emerged, just one passenger in white in the crowd, someone innocently having fun during the early days of the cruise. Who can imagine looking at this footage here, slowing it down, that things would end for Anna the way they did?
Regarded our planet with envious eyes.
Of course, whoever was watching Anna, and we know who was watching her with obsessive, envious eyes as well, along with hard-to-control impulses. Coming back to Nancy Gray, she's described Kepner's death as a shock to the conscience, and what's making all of this worse is the apparent intransigence, this slow procedure to bring charges, to see justice in this case. And I suppose, what is worse than an 18-year-old losing her life for nothing? Well, I think one thing worse is a 6-year-old losing hers, and no one facing any censure for that ever. Will that happen in this case? Will someone be held responsible in this case? Or will someone say eventually, we do not have sufficient evidence to bring charges? Well, I'm not going to take it further than that. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.